Let's talk about forces. Let's start off with intermolecular force. Intermolecular force are the forces between molecules. They hold the molecules together. Now, an example of this would be a water bottle. If there wasn't any intermolecular forces, what will happen is the bottle would turn into gas. Now, when you go from the strongest to weakest out of all the intermolecular forces, the strongest one is hydrogen bonding. The second strongest one is dipole-dipole, and the third strongest one, which is also known as the weakest, is van der Waals. Let's talk about the intramolecular forces. Intramolecular forces are the forces within compounds. They hold the atoms together. And now this force is the ones that we're most familiar with since we've been doing it since grade 9. And an example of this would be covalent and ionic. And the goal of this force is to fulfill the octet rule. When we talk about ionic, we always think about a metal and a nonmetal, where nonmetal always gains the electrons. But there's one key thing to remember here. If you do a covalent bond, what can happen is it can be considered as an ionic bond, and the reason is it's because the opposites attract, and now they can have different charges which result in ionic bond. But a way to be sure is looking at this timeline right here. So when you get the electronegativity of the biggest element and you subtract it from the other element, what you get is a total electronegativity value. And now if it's in between 0 and 0.5, it's going to be a covalent bond. If it's between 0.5 to 1.7, it's going to be polar covalent. And if it's 1.7 to 3.3, it's going to be an ionic bond. And that's how you properly identify what exactly bond it is, either a covalent, polar covalent, or ionic. Now let's talk about another type of bond, and that bond's covalent bond. And covalent bond is basically a bond with two or more nonmetals, and they're only sharing. Covalent bonds never give away electrons. None of the elements give away electrons, they only share. And there's two types of covalent bonds. There's nonpolar and polar bonds, which I'll talk in another video. Okay, let's talk about electronegativity. Electronegativity is a combination of electron affinity and ionization energy. It's when the elements attract a pair of electrons, and electronegativity determines a bonding. So as I've mentioned before, when you have the highest electronegativity of an element and you subtract it from the other electronegativity of the other element, what happens is you get the exact bonding, and there's three types, either covalent, polar covalent, or ionic. Let's talk about diatomic elements. Diatomic elements are usually messed up with compounds. But the thing is, with diatomic elements, it's not a compound, considering that there are no two elements combining together. There are only one element that combines together. And as you can see here, it's a whole list of the different diatomic elements. And these diatomic elements are naturally found in nature.